We did it! We had another playtest, and we did it! And it was great! Yep, we finally got to do another playtest a couple weeks ago, and it was fantastic. We started with the character generation that I talked about here on the little old vlog we've got going here, and it was so blazingly fast that we were able to actually play. That has been such an obstacle amidst so many groups, but also with the target market, which is the wife. And so frequently we make characters and the process is so long and drawn out that nothing ever happens, but we made it through. Character creation happened in like 30 seconds. I believe the exact words when I said we're done with character creation were wow. And not in the wow that's so bad, but in the wow that's great sort of way. So that was fantastic. We jumped in the scenario and I started to try and explain how Project Prometheus was working now with the 3-act structure and garnering of exploration tokens and then spending them. And then as I was explaining, I realized, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. It didn't make sense. The exploration tokens, even though I had talked about it on the podcast before and everything, when I was talking about it with her, I realized this is just cumbersome and messy and hard to keep track of and hard to judge out how many tokens you should get. So I just decided to ditch it. I just wiped out the whole system. So I kept the 3-act structure. I had, previous to this, written down what those 3 acts were going to be and what things could be learned during each of those acts. So in the first act, she would be introduced into the game as a new character. She would find her way over to the mushroom swamp forest, to the deforestation camps nearby, and discover the location there with 2 different rings of tents. The tents that are very close to the forest being very, very heavily clad, big, thick furs covering everything and leathers, while the ones at the back seemed more normal. So she got up close, and things that could have been learned here, which was essentially her entry point into the swamp. Once again, going with low risk, low reward to start off with, just to ease them into the scenario, was that that the mushrooms would exude a poison, that poison could be used as a medicine, that she could hire a guide through the forest, that this poison that gets exuded actually happens explosively, that they build up over time and then massive explosion of poison gas. Due to the efforts of the previous adventurer from the Explorers Guild, the kobolds had teamed up with humans to hunt down the swamp monsters, and so there were a couple of kobold hunting groups nearby that she could have talked to and learned from, as well as the fact that there were wild roars happening from deep within the forest. Now, this first scenario started off a little dicey because, once again, she didn't really have direction. Hopefully this time, I was able to recognize that was happening and was able to kind of give her a little bit of a nudge by saying that at the center of the forest, you can see far off in the distance, there is a giant mushroom, way bigger than all the rest, and with a ton of holes. And out of those holes are spewing forth seemingly endless amounts of waterfall. So we had our MacGuffin that she could chase after. We had a setting and set pieces that she could interact with. And it actually turned out pretty well. She moved forward, talked to the people in the tents. They referred her to get to the closer up tents. She learned a couple things while she was there. They showed her the exploding mushrooms. She hired a guide to take her to the center of the mushroom forest, and she learned about the wild roars that had been happening. So with that, we just moved into Act 2. We ditched the exploration token stuff, as I mentioned earlier, and there she could have learned that the poison is fed by the water, that the mushrooms soak up this supernatural water, and that's what's turning them poisonous. That there were mushrooms growing on rocks that were out of reach of the water, at least to a much larger extent, and that they seem to be like normal mushrooms, that the water is not native to this area, and that there are more and more swamp monsters the further you go in to the swamp. So this went pretty well. She went with her guide into the swamp. She saw the rocks. She didn't learn about the other things. There wasn't a lot of investigation here. I don't think we were quite in that mindset yet, because she was very much focused on, I need to get to the MacGuffin. I need to reach the object and then turn it around. Which is an interesting point to note. Something I'll have to keep an eye on and see if over time people are pursuing the goal over exploring and learning about it first. That might cause a problem. We might need to reinstate some sort of gatekeeping mechanic. I don't know. But for the sake of this scenario, it actually turned out pretty well. So she learned a couple of things. Not a ton, but a couple. So I decided, okay, this entry into the next act, the third act, the highest risk, highest reward, you're going to go in not the best situation. Because you didn't do all that much exploring. So what ended up happening was that she was separated from her guide as a swamp monster. No, it wasn't even that. That's right. There was a raiding kobold group that they found wandering around with an injured member of the kobold, of the group that had been injured by a fight that they had been in recently. She told her guide to show the kobolds back to camp because they were hopelessly lost. And then she was alone. She was dancing between these constantly exploding mushrooms, trying to get further and further into the forest where they were more and more densely packed. Trying to avoid the buildup and explosions as she went. Until eventually, she got caught off guard, and one of the swamp monsters found her. That started a great chase scene through the forest as more and more and more of these swamp monsters came out of the shadows of the mushroom caps that this forest was ensconced in. As she went further and further into the forest, having to dodge more and more out of the way of these exploding mushrooms with more and more monsters coming at her. It was a really great chase scene. It really was. And using those three different character attributes was working really well at this point, which I didn't expect because it's so simple, but it was making a lot of physical rolls to make sure she could outrun the things, and then a lot of mental rolls to see if she could plot a course through the mushroom field that would keep her free from the poison. And it was still dramatic, and there were still consequences, and it was fine. I didn't miss having a dodge skill and a reflex skill and a fight skill and a, chase skill and like all that stuff. Like it just wasn't needed. It just turned out to be fluff. And this worked just fine. So she made it out. Like I said, she was going to be in kind of a perilous situation because of the stuff that she left behind so far. So she gets to the edge of the swamp forest, where she sees a giant clearing around this giant, hundreds of feet tall mushroom with all the waterfalls pouring out of it. And as she gets to the edge, she had to make one last speed roll as this plethora of monsters were descending on her and the forest was exploding and everything. She needed one last really tough roll to make it out of there without being harmed, and she failed by one. So one swamp monster grabs her foot as she makes a final jump out of the swamp ring, and she lands face down in a giant puddle of this water and is trying to pull herself away, the monster slowly pulling her in, and we got stuck. She didn't know what to do. This is where one of the weaknesses came to light about the bare bones aspect of the character creation. We didn't have any inventory, we didn't have any other skills, it was just physical, social, and mental. And that situation left her not knowing what to do. So we talked for a little bit, like, hey, like this is a world where anything can happen, right? Technology mixes with fantasy and magic perfectly soundly, and we're just going to let you kind of make up who your character is on the fly, and then we'll see that evolve over time. And as you say something, that will then become codified, and we'll say, yes, you have that on your person now, and you can reuse that, or say, oh, no, I left that at home, or whatever. Like that's not the important thing. The important thing of this game is not resource management, it's learning, exploration, consequences. And after that bit of a conversation, she kind of understood a little bit better and just made a quick decision of I pull my backpack off and bash it into the swamp monster's hand. And I said, okay, great. Yeah, that works. And so she did it. She got the roll that she needed. I need to get out of that habit of saying roll. She got the spin that she needed. She got the right score and bashed it off. And so she started stumbling away into the clearing as a ton of these swamp monsters were gaining a lot of ground since she had been trapped. And out of nowhere, we entered into the third act with a giant version of the swamp monsters that looked more like a dog than a pile of sludge like these ones did, cruising across the open expanse, landing right on over her. You know, this thing is like 20 feet tall. She sees these large dog-like feet sticking into the ground and hears this loud mountainous roar as it faces the swamp monsters coming into the clearing. Although it looks remarkably like a swamp monster, at least in texture and sloppiness of stuff kind of like falling off of it, but slightly more well-formed, as it chases them back into the swamp ring. And I gave her a little bit of time to react. She dove down into the water and swam to the mushroom under the water. And she successfully made her physical roll. We've been using physical for speed, stealth, strength, all those things, just lumped into one. And at least during the playtest, it didn't seem to cause a problem. Once again, these are stories about characters that are extremely well talented, very, very, very highly trained, and extremely capable. So I kind of don't mind conflating all those and making them a little bit stronger than normal. It also fits my DMing style of not having super harsh consequences and letting players succeed more than fail. So those were all good things. She makes it over to the mushroom, hides in one of the holes until the large guardian monster has disappeared from view. She got out and started exploring the mushroom. Upon investigating the mushroom, she noticed that there was a large staircase winding slowly upwards around this hundreds of feet tall mushroom, around the exterior, that it was made out of the mushroom, but carved somehow, even though it didn't seem to have had instruments. It was almost like someone put like a texture stamp onto it or something. It seemed to have just kind of grown that way. So she started to investigate it. She sat down, started sketching the mushroom, and this is where I feel like the game really sunk in. It's about learning and exploration. She started doing all of these things to study it, and it was so cool to see. Some things she could have learned there is that these stairs lead all the way to the top of the mushroom, that there is a ravine of special water that leads straight to this mother mushroom, but until it hits the mother mushroom, it is just regular water. That there's a giant swamp monster that guards it. She found that out really quick. That the swamp monster, the guardian monster, nurses the mushroom to be fully producing this special magical water to feed the rest of the forest. That the tissue of the mom mushroom has some wild growth properties, and swamp monsters are not naturally occurring things. They are actually spawned from this mushroom, and they kind of drip off of it once they are fully formed and large and sentient, at which case they are chased off by the large guardian beast to go live in the outsides of the forest to keep people from getting very close. She would have learned also that there's a magic ring at the very top of the mushroom embedded into it with a rainbow on it. And this is a Lukerpon, which is the old version of leprechauns. I thought it would be fun. I don't know. And that if she removed the ring, that it would completely get rid of everything magical about the swamp. And if she kept it, then it would continue to be kind of a dangerous place. So she decided, after having sketched everything and kind of analyzed it, that she would try and take a tissue sample. So she cut a bit of the mushroom out and put it in a tube, at which point she heard this massive splashing as the guardian monster came running around the mushroom, and she had just enough time to duck into another hole with a little stream coming out of it, and she successfully made her physical roll to spin her. She made a successful physical spin and got the score she needed to avoid the sight of the guardian hound, who then started licking the mushroom until all of a sudden it seemed to be like no sample was taken from it. So that's where she learned that, you know, it was kind of in charge of the shroom and taking care of it. Eventually she decided to start climbing the stairs, making her way up, and she got pretty high until eventually there was a gap in the stairs. That gap she made a jump across, but it was a little clumsy. She kind of damaged the mushroom a little bit as she landed and like was clawing onto the stairs trying to pull herself up, which attracted the attention of the guardian monster. So she started sprinting around the stairs as it leaped up and started climbing up the mushroom and like bashing its face into the mushroom, melding with it, trying to grab her as she had to dive and dodge out of the roll. And it was a great little action scene on a really cool set piece. And eventually the thing backed off as she heard coming out of the forest and "Ah!" And she saw bursting out of the ring of the mushrooms the guide that she had hired to take her here. It seems that he had returned after escorting the kobolds back to the camp. And, well, the swamp monsters were following him into the safe haven of the mother's room, which the guardian monster did not like at all. It leapt down and started chasing after the other swamp monsters, getting them back into the forest. Sarah said, well, I can't just leave him there. So she said, do I have a rope? And I said, oh yeah, totally you have a rope. Like the one with like the crank on it, on your back and everything. Yeah, you've got that. Once again, the purpose is not resource management. It's not inventory control. It's exploration, learning, and everything. And that was a reasonable thing for a trained explorer to be carrying with them. Knowing they're going to climb great heights, that makes perfect sense that they would have come prepared with that. So she throws the rope down. The guide climbs on and starts climbing up. Meanwhile, the guardian beast has turned back around and starts chasing after them. He climbs up to the top and catches up with her just as the beast starts climbing into the mushroom once again, damaging it as it climbs up, seemingly more concerned about them than the damage it was doing. As they sprint up these stairs and they're getting so close, they can see the entrance just a few feet away, an opening into the mushroom, and they make it inside. But not quite quick enough. The swamp monster makes a mad dash, one last attempt to stop these things from polluting its mother shroom, as it inserts its large, massive paw into the hole, and they had to make a physical spin in order to make it out. And my wife failed. After taking a little bit of time to think about it for myself, I said, hey, can we take a break? I kind of need to figure out what this means and how the world is going to react. And I decided the most dramatic thing that could happen, and most interesting, was not that she failed, but that her guide did. And that's what happened. The paw splurges onto this guide and pulls him out as he, in slow motion, is reaching out to the explorer who he trusted to keep him safe with one final yell, and they disappear from view. This started getting a little bit darker than I was expecting, but I kind of just wanted to see where it went. And Sarah, to her credit, was brilliant. She said, well, I can't leave him to die. So she ran out and started cutting into the mushroom just haphazardly, trying to deal as much structural damage to it as she could. as she saw the guardian beast climbing down the mushroom with this guide, like, just stuck like, you know, like a stick that's been mushed into chewed up gum. And the beast turns around, sees her, and roars as it starts barreling its way back up as she is just stabbing into this thing. The guide rolls out during the haphazardness of this whole event and goes careening hundreds of feet down into the deep waters below. She doesn't see him. She only has enough time to duck back into the entrance and run away, making a successful physical roll to get away from the encroaching paw inside the cavern, and withstands one more roar as the monster leaves sight. She doesn't know what happened to the guide, doesn't know what happened to the monster, but she thinks they're safe and chooses to move forward. Now, one of the reasons I loved this so much was because she was synthesizing all the information she had gained about the environment, about its actors, and the ties between them to create a solution to a dire problem in very tight deadlines of her own ability. There was no me coaching her through or like, well, this is what the DM wants you to do. She came up with her own solution, and it totally worked. And that was incredible. That was exactly what I've been hoping for this whole time. So, being lost as to what to do, she climbs up the last remaining stairs, surfacing at the top of the mushroom. She wanders her way to the center, finds the ring, sketches it, and decides she didn't want to make the call. So she submits all the information back to the Explorers Guild, and that's where we ended. Oh, right. Eventually she catches up with her guide. He had hid in one of the holes as well. They get out. Everything was fine. And I'm sure I'm forgetting a couple of details here and there about exactly how she kind of learned about things, but more or less that's the idea, right? And I've already blabbered long enough. The point was, this playtest showed we're moving in the right direction, which is so encouraging. It has been so long without any real progress that this brightens my soul. We're on the right track with character creation. I think we might need a little bit more flushed out there, but overall we're going in the right direction. Same thing with the 3-act structure. That worked really well, and I think, in fact, I'm going to try and steal that for every other game I DM ever. Because it really helped the way that I DM to create something dramatic that had tempo, that had pace, and was meaningful. And I mean, that's pretty much it. Those were the big things that we learned. We're on the right track. There are a couple of things that are still fuzzy, and we need to get those working a little bit more smoothly. And that's fine. That's a great place to be in. And on that note, I also spent some time to restructure the rules, delete all the old stuff that doesn't apply anymore, and I'm getting together a rule book, an actual, honest-to-goodness rule book in the form of a Google Doc, which I'm going to be releasing to Reddit soon. I'm going to be on the RPG subreddit, posting this to get people's thoughts and feedback before developing it very much further. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And if anyone wants to get early access to it, feel free to just get in touch. I'm more than happy to share this around. Like I say in my channel intro video, I really just want a couple more smiles in the world. So if anyone is interested, feel free to get in touch, and we'll get something put together. So anyways, thanks for watching. We'll talk to you next time.